The memo was a single page, typed on studio letterhead, and it arrived on the production manager's desk at 7:14 in the morning. Wait, because what Gary Cooper did over the next 11 days had nothing to do with politics or principle in any way anyone could point to. It had everything to do with a lighting setup so complicated that only one man in Hollywood could execute it, and that wasn't an accident. March 1952, Paramount Pictures. The production was a prestige western called The Long Valley, the kind of picture that got made because Gary Cooper wanted to make it. He had approval over director, script, and key crew. What he didn't have was approval over the quiet machinery of fear that had been grinding through Hollywood for 3 years, chewing up careers and spitting out silence. The lighting technician's name was Samuel Brennan, 44 years old, 19 years in the business, a man who had worked his way up from hauling cable to designing some of the most sophisticated lighting setups in the industry. He'd lit 3 of John Ford's pictures. He'd invented a technique for simulating firelight that cinematographers still talked about. He was, by any measure, one of the best in the business. He was also, according to a single-page memo that had arrived from somewhere in the studio's executive structure, a name on a list. Notice what the memo didn't say, because that's how these things worked. It didn't say Samuel Brennan was a communist. It didn't say he'd done anything illegal. It didn't even say he was under investigation. It simply noted that his name had appeared on a security concern document circulating among the studios and recommended that Paramount consider alternative personnel for sensitive productions. That was enough. In 1952, that was more than enough. The production manager, a careful man named Walter Hobbs, read the memo twice. Then he walked down the hall to the office of the associate producer, a man named Franklin Yates, and set it on his desk without a word. Yates read it. His face didn't change. When did this come in? This morning. Courier from the main office. Does Cooper know? Not yet. Let's keep it that way. Yates folded the memo, slipped it into his jacket pocket. We're 3 weeks from principal photography. We can find another gaffer. Tell Brennan we're tightening the budget. Had to make some crew adjustments. Standard procedure. He's been with this production for 8 months. He designed the entire lighting plan for the canyon sequence. Then someone else will execute it. Yates stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the studio lot where golf carts were ferrying people between sound stages. Walter, I don't like this any more than you do, but you know how it works. We keep Brennan. Someone makes a phone call. Suddenly our distribution deal in the Midwest is in jeopardy. Theater chains won't book a picture with names on it. Sponsors pull out. The whole thing collapses. Over a lighting technician? Over a name on a piece of paper. That's all it takes. Listen to what happened when Gary Cooper found out, because this is where the story turns. Cooper heard about it 3 days later, not from Hobbs or Yates, but from the cinematographer, a veteran named Marcus Webb who had worked with Cooper on 4 previous pictures. Webb came to Cooper's dressing room after a costume fitting, closed the door, and told him what was happening. Sam's out. They're not even giving him a reason, just budget adjustments. Cooper was quiet for a long moment. He was sitting in front of the mirror, still wearing the worn cavalry jacket they'd fitted him for, and his reflection looked back at him with an expression that gave nothing away. Who made the call? Yates, but the memo came from higher up. Someone in New York, probably. You know how these things travel. Sam's name is on a list. That's the word. Cooper turned from the mirror. His eyes were the palest blue, and when he looked at you directly, it felt like being measured for something you couldn't name. What list? Nobody knows. Nobody ever knows. It's just whispers, Coop. Whispers and memos, and suddenly a man who's been working for 20 years can't get hired anywhere. Has Sam done anything? Define anything. Webb's voice was bitter. He went to some meetings in the 30s. Everybody went to meetings in the 30s. He signed a petition once. Something about Spanish refugees 10 years ago, maybe more. That's it. That's his crime. Cooper stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the studio lot hummed with the ordinary business of making pictures. Carpenters building sets, trucks hauling equipment, actors in costume walking between stages. All of it dependent on the machinery running smoothly. All of it vulnerable to a single piece of paper with the wrong name on it. The canyon sequence, Cooper said. That's Sam's design? Every light, every shadow, every reflection off the water. He's been working on it for months. It's the most complicated setup I've ever seen. Could someone else do it? Webb hesitated. Technically, maybe. There are other good gaffers. But Sam's design is specific. It's not just about placing lights. It's about timing, about how the sun moves through the canyon, about catching the right moment when the natural light and the artificial light blend together. He's got it mapped out to the minute. Someone else could approximate it, but it wouldn't be the same. Cooper was still looking out the window. His jaw had tightened slightly, but his voice stayed level. Set up a meeting with Yates. Tomorrow morning, just the three of us, you, me, and him. What are you going to do? I'm going to talk about lighting. Remember this detail because it's the key to everything that follows. Gary Cooper didn't walk into that meeting to argue politics. He didn't give a speech about freedom or conscience or the poison spreading through Hollywood. He did something far more effective. He made Samuel Brennan indispensable. The meeting took place at 9 the next morning in Yates's office. Cooper arrived in his street clothes, no costume, no character to hide behind. He sat down across from Yates, accepted a cup of coffee, and waited for the associate producer to finish arranging papers on his desk. Coop, I assume Marcus told you about the crew adjustments. He mentioned we're losing Sam Brennan. Budget tightening, you know how it is. We're looking at a few positions across the board. I want to talk about the canyon sequence. Yates blinked. Whatever he'd expected Cooper to say, that wasn't it. The canyon sequence? It's the centerpiece of the picture. The ambush, the river crossing, the whole third act builds to it. Marcus and I have been discussing the lighting plan, and we want to make some changes. What kind of changes? Cooper reached into his jacket, pulled out a sheaf of papers. He spread them on Yates's desk. Diagrams, sketches, technical specifications covered in handwritten notes. This is what we had planned. Standard coverage, nothing too complicated. But I've been thinking about it, and I think we can do something special, something that's never been done before. He pointed to one of the diagrams. The canyon has a natural light phenomenon. For about 40 minutes in the late afternoon, the sun hits the western wall at an angle that creates this golden reflection off the rock face. If we time our shooting correctly, we can use that natural light as our key and blend it with artificial sources to create a look that's completely unique. Yates was frowning at the papers. This sounds complicated. It is extremely complicated. The timing has to be perfect. The artificial lights have to be calibrated to match the color temperature of the natural light as it changes, and the whole thing has to be designed in advance, down to the minute, because once the sun moves past a certain point, we lose the effect. How long have you been planning this? Marcus and I have been discussing it for weeks, but the technical execution, the actual lighting plan, that's beyond what either of us can do. We need someone who specializes in this kind of work. Cooper paused. Let the silence build. We need Sam Brennan. Notice what Cooper had just done. He hadn't defended Brennan. He hadn't argued that the list was wrong or that the accusations were unfair. He'd simply created a situation where firing Brennan meant losing the most important sequence in the picture. Yates's face had gone tight. Coop, I appreciate your commitment to the craft, but there are factors here you're not aware of. I'm aware of all the factors that matter to this picture, and what matters is that we have 4 days to shoot the canyon sequence, a 40-minute window of usable light each day, and a lighting plan that only one man in Hollywood knows how to execute. We can find someone else. Can we? Cooper's voice was still calm, still conversational. Marcus, tell him. Webb leaned forward. I've been making pictures for 30 years. I've worked with every top gaffer in the business. What Sam has designed for this sequence, the timing, the color matching, the integration of natural and artificial sources, I've never seen anything like it. It would take another technician months to learn the plan, and we start shooting in 3 weeks. Then we simplify the plan. If we simplify it, we lose the effect. We end up with standard coverage that looks like every other Western that's ever been made. Webb shook his head. This could be something special. This could be the sequence people remember from this picture, but only if Sam is there to execute it. Yates looked from Webb to Cooper and back again. His hand went to his jacket pocket, where the folded memo still rested, and Cooper saw the gesture without acknowledging it. There are considerations beyond the production, Yates said carefully, factors that affect the studio as a whole. I understand. Cooper stood up, gathered his papers. And I'm telling you that this picture doesn't get made, not the way it needs to be made, without Sam Brennan. If the studio wants to make a different picture, with different lighting and a different look, that's their choice. But I signed on to make this one. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob. Let me know what you decide. Wait, because the story doesn't end with that meeting. The story ends with what happened over the next 10 days, as Gary Cooper quietly rebuilt the entire production schedule around protecting one name on a piece of paper. The studio didn't decide immediately. For 3 days, the memo sat on Yates's desk, unsigned, while executives in Los Angeles and New York exchanged phone calls about liability and risk and public perception. Meanwhile, Cooper did something that nobody expected. He made himself dependent on Samuel Brennan. Every meeting about the production, Cooper brought up the canyon sequence. Every discussion of scheduling, he emphasized the technical requirements. He requested additional prep time for the lighting setup. He asked for test shoots to calibrate the equipment. He insisted on rehearsals that required Brennan's presence. By the 5th day, Samuel Brennan's name appeared on so many production documents, so many scheduling memos, so many technical specifications that removing him would have meant rewriting the entire shoot. And still, Cooper never mentioned the list, never acknowledged that anything unusual was happening. He simply talked about lighting, about timing, about the 40-minute window when the sun hit the canyon wall at exactly the right angle. On the 8th day, Yates called Cooper back to his office. We've decided to retain Mr. Brennan for the duration of the production. Good. The canyon sequence won't work without him. The studio wants it noted that this decision was made purely on technical grounds, based on the production's specific requirements. Of course. And Coop? Yates's voice had an edge to it. This doesn't change anything. After this picture, Brennan's on his own. We can't protect everyone. Cooper nodded. I'm just trying to make a movie, Franklin. That's all any of us are trying to do. Listen to what happened when they finally shot the canyon sequence, because this is where the story finds its meaning. They arrived at the location at noon on a Tuesday. 63 crew members plus cast, plus equipment trucks, plus a catering tent that served coffee strong enough to strip paint. The canyon was everything the scouts had promised. Red rock walls rising 200 feet on either side, a shallow river running through the middle, and that peculiar quality of light that had drawn Cooper's attention in the first place. Samuel Brennan had been on site since dawn, checking angles, adjusting reflectors, calibrating the color temperature of the artificial lights against samples of the natural light he'd been measuring for weeks. He moved through the setup with the quiet efficiency of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and didn't need to talk about it. Cooper watched him work. At one point, their eyes met across the crowded set, and something passed between them. Not acknowledgement exactly. Something simpler, just one man seeing another. At 3:47 in the afternoon, Brennan called out that the light was approaching the window. The crew moved into position. The actors took their marks. And for the next 38 minutes, they captured something that had never been captured before. A sequence where the natural and artificial light blended so seamlessly that the canyon seemed to glow from within, as if the rock itself was the source of illumination. When they finished, when the sun moved past the critical angle and the magic faded into ordinary afternoon, there was a moment of silence on the set. Then someone started to applaud, and the whole crew joined in, and Samuel Brennan stood in the middle of it with his light meter in his hand, looking embarrassed by the attention. Cooper walked over to him, shook his hand. "Beautiful work, Sam." "Thank you, Mr. Cooper." Just Coop. That was all. No speeches, no acknowledgement of what had happened behind the scenes. Just two men who had done their jobs, standing in a canyon as the light faded around them. Here's what happened to the people in this story, because endings reveal what beginnings conceal. Samuel Brennan finished the picture. His work on the canyon sequence was praised in reviews when the film was released, though his name appeared only in the end credits, in small type, where most audiences never looked. He worked for 2 more years in Hollywood, on smaller productions for directors who either didn't know about the list or didn't care. Then, in 1954, the pressure finally became too much. A theater chain in the Midwest threatened to boycott a picture he'd worked on, and the studio caved. Brennan left the business, moved to Oregon, opened a small photography studio that specialized in wedding portraits and high school graduations. He never spoke publicly about what happened. He never named Gary Cooper as the man who had saved his job, even temporarily. When his granddaughter asked him, years later, why he'd left Hollywood, he said only that the business changed, and I changed with it. Gary Cooper won his 2nd Academy Award for High Noon, the same year The Long Valley was released. A film about a man who stands alone when everyone else turns away. A film that some people read as a commentary on the Blacklist, though Cooper himself never said so publicly. What Cooper did say in an interview late in his life was this: "You can't always fix what's wrong. Sometimes all you can do is protect the person standing next to you, and sometimes that's enough." The Long Valley is not remembered as one of Cooper's best pictures. It made modest money, received modest reviews, and faded into the background of his career. But the canyon sequence, those 38 minutes of impossible light, still gets mentioned in cinematography textbooks, still gets shown in film schools, still makes people wonder how they achieved that effect with the technology available in 1952. The answer was Samuel Brennan, and behind Samuel Brennan, invisible in the frame, was Gary Cooper, not making speeches, not fighting battles, just quietly arranging the schedule so that one man's name on a piece of paper didn't end his career. Look at what the story really means when you strip away the mythology. The Hollywood blacklist destroyed hundreds of careers. It drove talented people out of the industry, into exile, into silence, sometimes into suicide. It was a machine of fear that fed on itself, that grew stronger with every name added to every list, that made cowards out of people who had never imagined themselves capable of such cruelty. Gary Cooper couldn't stop that machine. Nobody could. It would grind on for years, destroying lives until it finally collapsed under the weight of its own absurdity. But Cooper could protect one man, one name, one career that got to continue for 2 more years, instead of ending that March morning when a memo arrived on a production manager's desk. He did it without speeches, without confrontation, without ever letting anyone point to him and say, he's one of them, he sympathizes, put his name on the list too. He just talked about lighting, about timing, about a 40-minute window when the sun hit a canyon wall at exactly the right angle. That's what quiet resistance looks like, not grand gestures, not martyrdom, just the patient, careful work of making the right thing necessary instead of optional. Samuel Brennan died in 1987 in a nursing home in Portland. His obituary mentioned his photography business, his wife of 40 years, his 3 children and 7 grandchildren. It didn't mention Hollywood. It didn't mention Gary Cooper. It didn't mention a canyon in California where, for 38 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon in 1952, a man whose career was supposed to be over got to do the best work of his life. But the work survives. That's the thing about light, about craft, about the stubborn insistence on doing something beautiful, even when the world is trying to destroy you. The work survives. And somewhere in that canyon sequence, in the way the natural and artificial light blend together so seamlessly you can't tell where one ends and the other begins, there's a message from Samuel Brennan to everyone who ever wondered what happened to the names on those lists. We were here, we did our work. They tried to erase us, and we're still here. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. This is a dramatized story inspired by real people and events. Specific dialogue, scenes, and side characters are creative reconstruction for storytelling purposes.